Snapping is enough to drive you nuts. These two regions look like they're at the start of the project, right? Wrong. They're not right at the start, they're ever so slightly afterwards. And this causes problems. If things don't start at the same time, then you get funny filtering, you get things out of time, out of phase, it's rubbish. And snapping is a bit of a pain. Snapping has got better in the last few versions of Logic, but it's still a pain. The snapping menu's at the top here. You turn snap off, job done. Well, not really. You've got smart snapping, which is actually really good. The smart snapping works out where do you want to try and snap this thing. So Logic has to work out, well, do you want it to snap to the bar, to the subdivision, to the beat, and in general does a really good job based on how far you're zoomed in. So if you zoomed in really far out, it in general makes those snaps quite far apart. Can you see there about every beat? But when I was just zoomed in a second ago, they were much closer, actually more like subdivisions. So depending on how zoomed you are in, it makes a pretty good guess as to where you want to do that. Now sometimes a guess isn't good enough. Sometimes you want to be really specific about where exactly you want things to be snapped to, in which case you can snap to the bar, the beat, division, which is like the quavers. Ticks. Ticks are the very smallest subdivisions in Logic. I think there are 960 ticks to a beat. And then there are other things like frames and quarter frames, which are useful for doing video, and actually samples as well, the very smallest distance that Logic can deal with, the actual samples between digital samples in the recordings. So that's fine. Let's snap it to bar, and then as we move it, it snaps to the bars, which is great. Now what happens if actually what we want is this is here? Okay, if these two regions are here and we want to snap them to this bar, bar 2, well that should be easy. Then we put them to bar and we snap them to bar 2. Let me just drag them both over there. Perfect. There. Oh no, but I want them to be there, right on the bar line. Why don't they go there? Well, that's because it listens to the offset and it takes account of that offset from the bar when you move it. This is called relative. It's relative to where it was and it remembers that relative offset. If you don't want this to happen, click on absolute, because absolute is absolutely on the bar and absolutely here. Now you might not want this if, for example, you'd recorded a little bit of audio and before the singer says her vowel, she's got a very, very, very small amount of consonants like choose, and the ch comes just before the beat, but the oo comes right on the beat, only ever so slightly, like a fraction early, but you want this to happen there, in which case if you move this to the right by a bar, you don't want it to happen absolutely, because then it'll make all that difference wrong. So in fact you want it to move relatively to the next bar so that you still maintain that timing, that offset from the bar, so that, for example, the consonant or that other sound in the vocal is maintained. You can have extra control over snapping. You can defeat snapping wherever snapping is. So let's turn snapping on to bar so it's obvious to see. We've got snapping happening here by bar. If you hold down control whilst you're dragging, it turns snapping off and you can then have more control over things. In general, if you have control pressed down, then it will give you added control. It's the same if you are making some automation. If I click and drag automation, it happens very, very quickly. If I hold down control, it makes it happen much more slowly, gives me much more control. Holding down the control button generally gives you more control, which is easy to remember. So let's turn off, let's turn off alignment guides. Oh well, we'll just keep it there. There's only one more thing to bear in mind. Let's say that this was in a really strange place. So let's move it to smart snapping and let's turn it onto relative again. Let's say that these were in a bit of a weird place and you wanted to make sure they were absolutely in the same position. So I've got this bongo riff starting and then I want the bass to be in the same place. You can try and snap it to the same thing, but quite often it doesn't work. You'll notice it will snap slightly off the other one and it's just a pain, in which case it's actually best to turn off snap to grid and turn on alignment guides, in which case it stops listening at all to the snapping and it tries to work out where the other regions start and stop to snap exactly to them. And when you can see that yellow line, that's when you know they're aligned perfectly. Now this has been an absolute nightmare in Logic in the past. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it's not. In recent versions this has been much more predictable and much more well, sanity maintaining, and this does click there. It's always best if you're trying to use alignment guides, turn off the snap to grid, because if it's pulling things to and fro on the grid, it's going to stop listening to the alignment guides. As it happens, those alignment guides are happening this time, but in the past, turning the snap to grid off can make those alignment guides more easy to do so. And that's all I wanted to say about snapping.